the shadow of the indomitable. The legend of Reeves stood 6'2" in an era of small men, astride a massive gray stallion, wearing a wide-brimmed black hat that seemed to swallow the sun, to the outlaws of the Indian Territory. He wasn't just a lawman, he was a phantom. They called him the Invincible Marshal. He carried 2 Colt .45 peacemakers, handles turned forward for a cross, and a reputation that he could outshoot any man and outthink any devil. This is not a tall tale of the Wild West. This is the documented reality of Bass Reeves, the man who escaped slavery to become the most feared lawman in American history. The heat in Grayson County, Texas, was a physical weight, thick with the smell of horse sweat and dry earth. Bass stood in the shadow of the big house, his large hands folded calmly. Though his heart beat with the rhythmic precision of a war drum, he was a slave to George Reeves, a man who took Bass to the front lines of the Civil War as a body servant. But it was a card game, a simple dispute over a hand of poker, that changed the course of American history. George, fueled by whiskey and pride, struck Bass. In that moment, the tether snapped. Bass didn't just strike back, he laid the man out flat and fled into the night. He didn't run south. He ran into the heart of the Indian Territory, the lawless lands of what is now Oklahoma. For years, Bass lived among the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole nations. He didn't just hide, he adapted. He learned the languages, the tracking techniques, and the silent art of the hunt. He became a man of the woods, a shadow among the blackjack oaks. He discovered that while the white man's world saw him as property, the frontier saw him as a force of nature. When the 13th Amendment was signed and the war ended, Bass emerged from the territory a free man. He settled in Arkansas as a farmer, a husband, and a father, but the peace wouldn't last. The West was burning in 1875. Isaac Parker, the hanging judge, was appointed to the Western District of Arkansas. Parker needed men who knew the territory, men who were incorruptible, and men who could survive the hell on the border. When he heard of a giant of a man who spoke the native tongues and could hit a silver dollar from 50 paces, he sent for Bass Reeves, the judge said, looking up from his bench. "I'm told you fear no man." "I fear God, Your Honor," Bass replied, his voice a low rumble. "And I reckon that's enough." Bass was handed a badge. He couldn't read or write a single word of English, but he had a photographic memory. He would have the warrants read to him once, memorize the names and the crimes. And never once in 32 years did he arrest the wrong man. Bass knew that a black man riding into an outlaw camp with a badge was a target. So he became a ghost. One week he was a raggedy farmer with a broken wagon. The next, he was a sun-beaten gold prospector or a common outlaw looking for a place to hide. One of his most famous captures involved 2 brothers, the notorious Bruner outlaws. Bass, dressed as a tramp, walking 20 miles until he reached their mother's cabin. He showed her bullet holes in his hat, which he'd shot himself, and claimed the law was chasing him. She took him in that night while the brothers slept. Bass handcuffed them both without waking them. As he led them away the next morning, the mother cursed him. Bass simply tipped his hat, and said, "Duty's a cold master, ma'am, but it's the only one I serve." The true test of Bass Reeves wasn't a shootout with a gang, it was a warrant delivered to his desk in 1902. The name on the paper was Benny Reeves, his own son. Benny had killed his wife in a fit of jealousy. For 2 days, no other deputy would touch the warrant out of respect for Bass. When Bass returned to the office and saw the paper sitting untouched, his face went stone cold. He picked it up, saddled his horse, and tracked his own son down. He arrested him, brought him before Judge Parker, and saw him sentenced to life in Liverpool. To Bass, the law was sacred. It didn't care about blood, and it didn't care about skin. By the time Bass retired in 1907, he had brought in over 3,000 felons. He had killed 14 men in self-defense, but he always maintained he never shot a man unless he had to. He survived countless ambushes, had his hat shot off, his belt buckled shattered, and his buttons nipped by bullets yet. Not a single lead slug ever touched his skin. He spent his final years as a policeman in Oklahoma. There was no crime on his beat. Even the most hardened criminals simply didn't want to cross the path of the man who had outlived the Wild West itself. Why this story resonates, information rich. It highlights the complex legal structure of the Indian Territory and the hanging judge era cultural impact. It challenges the John Wayne stereotype of the West, showing a more diverse and grit-filled reality. Character depth. Bass Reeves is a model of integrity, a man who navigated the extreme racism of the 19th century through sheer competence and moral clarity. The Indian Territory in the 1880s was a 70,000 square mile labyrinth of jagged canyons, limestone caves, and dense blackjack thickets. It was the dead zone of the United States, a place where the law of the federal government stopped and the law of the Winchester began. Bass rode into the heart of this wilderness with a wagon, a cook, and a pocket full of death warrants. The air was thick with the smell of cedar and the copper timps of dry blood. He was hunting the Tom Story gang, a ruthless pack of horse thieves and murderers who had boasted that no lawman, white or black, would ever leave their canyon alive. Bass didn't ride in with guns blazing. He knew the math. 5 of them, 1 of him. He stopped 3 miles out, shed his marshal's coat, and donned a pair of filthy overalls and an old floppy hat. He hid his badges in the lining of his boot. He told his cook, "If I ain't back by moon high, drive the wagon back to Fort Smith. Don't look back." Bass walked into the Story camp limping, his boots caked in red clay. He looked like a man defeated by the land. The outlaws laughed as he approached, their hands hovering over their holsters. "Lost my horse to a rattler," Bass wheezed, his voice sounding brittle and old. "Got a bit of water for a dying man." Tom Story, a man with a face like scarred leather, spat on the ground. "We don't keep water for tramps." "I got gold," Bass whispered, leaning in as the outlaws crowded around to see the gold. The transformation happened in a heartbeat. The old man vanished. Bass's hands blurred a movement so fast it seemed fueled by lightning. Before Story could blink, the cold steel of a Colt .45 was pressed against his throat, and another was leveled at the chests of his 4 men. "The name is Bass Reeves, Deputy U.S. Marshal," he boomed, his voice now, and you boys are under arrest by the authority of Judge Isaac Parker. Now, drop him, or meet your maker right here in the dirt. The silence that followed was heavy. The outlaws looked at his eyes that had seen the horrors of the Civil War and the brutality of the frontier. They dropped their guns. They realized they weren't facing a man. They were facing an institution. Capturing them was the easy part. Bringing them back was the trial. For 2 weeks, Bass led them through territory chained together. He didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. He sat by the campfire, his Winchester across his knees, watching the shadows. The outlaws tried to bribe him. They tried to threaten his family. One night, one of the men managed to slip his shackles. He lunged at Bass with a hidden shiv. Without even standing up, Bass parried the blow with the barrel of his rifle and knocked the man unconscious with a single surgical strike. "I told you," Bass said to the remaining 4, his voice calm as a Sunday morning. "I'm taking you to the judge. Dead or alive is your choice. I prefer alive. It's less paperwork." When Bass pulled the wagon into Fort Smith, Arkansas, a crowd gathered. It was a common sight. The tall, obsidian-skinned marshal bringing in a string of white outlaws. In the Jim Crow's South, this was a walking paradox. To the black community, he was a hero. To the outlaws, he was a demon. And to the legal system, he was the most effective tool they had. But fame brought enemies. The more successful Bass became, the more the old South elements within the government tried to tear him down. They couldn't outshoot him, and they couldn't outrun him. So they tried to use the law against him. In 1886, Bass was charged with murder after a confrontation with his trail cook, William Leach. The trial was a media circus. The man who had arrested thousands was now standing in the prisoner's dock. The prosecution argued that Bass was a violent man, a product of a violent frontier. They tried to paint him as a rogue agent who used his badge as a license to kill. Bass took the stand. He spoke with the same quiet dignity he carried on the trail. He explained that Leach had reached for a gun after a dispute, and Bass had acted in. He didn't plead for mercy. He asked for justice. The jury, despite the racial tensions of the era, deliberated for only a few hours. They acquitted him. They knew that without Bass Reeves, the territory would slide back into the mouth of hell. He went back to work the next day. There were more warrants to serve. The narrative horizon. The story now moves toward the turn of the century, the closing of the frontier. The horses are being replaced by Model T Fords, and the wild canyons are being fenced in. Bass must navigate a world that is becoming civilized but more racially segregated, leading to his final, most heartbreaking case involving his own son. By the mid-1890s, the Wild West was dying, but it went down swinging. A new breed of outlaw had emerged, desperate men who used the newly laid railroad tracks to strike and vanish. Among them was the Wyatt Outlaw Gang, a group of specialists who had mastered the art of the long-range ambush. Bass Reeves was now in his late 50s. His mustache had turned a snowy white, contrasting sharply against his dark, weathered skin. His joints ached when the northern winds blew down from Kansas, but his eyes, those hawk-like, amber-tinted eyes, hadn't lost a fraction of their clarity. He was sent into the Panhandle to track the Wyatts. They had robbed a federal pay train killing 2 guards and a young clerk. The hanging judge, Parker, was dying, his health failing along with the old ways of the frontier. He sent a final message to Bass. Bring them in. Bass, don't let new centuries start with their blood on our hands. Bass didn't take a posse. A posse made noise. A posse was a target. Instead, he took his favorite horse, a gray named Soul, and a pack mule. For 12 days, he tracked them through a blizzard that turned the red earth into a blinding white hell. He didn't build fires. He ate dried buffalo meat and slept in the hollows of dead trees. He used the techniques he'd learned from the Seminoles 30 years prior, reading the broken twigs, the temperature of horse dung, and the way the birds flared in the distance. He found them holed up in an abandoned sod house near the Cimarron River. They were celebrating, passing around a bottle of cheap rye, thinking the snow had buried their tracks. They didn't know that Bass Reeves was a man who could track a shadow through a dark room. Bass didn't use a disguise this time. He wanted them to see the badge. He wanted them to know that the law was inevitable. At dawn, as the blue light of the morning hit the frost, Bass stood 100 yards from the cabin. He didn't yell. He didn't fire a warning shot. He simply began to sing a low, mournful spiritual he had heard as a child in the cotton fields of Texas. The singing drifted into the cabin. It was an eerie, haunting sound that pulled the outlaws from their sleep. Wyatt stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, squinting into the glare. "Who's out there?" Wyatt screamed. The end of the road, son Bass's voice carried across the snow like a physical weight. Wyatt fired. The bullet hissed past Bass's ear, clipping the brim of his hat. Bass didn't flinch. He levered his Winchester with a rhythmic, mechanical grace. Crack. Wyatt's shoulder shattered. Crack. The man behind him lost his revolver. Bass walked forward, firing with every step, closing the distance while bullets kicked up snow around his feet. He looked like an ancient god of war. By the time he reached the porch, 3 men were down, and the remaining 2 had thrown themselves onto the floor, screaming for mercy. He didn't kill them. He handcuffed them to their own bedposts, bandaged their wounds with the efficiency of a surgeon, and waited for the storm to break. The year 1902 brought the darkest cloud of Bass's career. It wasn't an outlaw that broke his heart. It was his own blood. His son, Benny, was a handsome, popular man but a fit of jealous rage led Benny to murder his wife. When the warrant was issued, the marshal's office went silent. Every deputy in the building looked at the floor. The head marshal, Leo Bennett, tried to hide the warrant, intending to give it to someone else. Bass walked into the office, his spurs jingling on the hardwood. He saw the tension. He saw the paper on Bennett's desk. "That's for Benny ain't it?" Bass asked. "Bass, let someone else do this," Bennett pleaded. "You've given 30 years to this badge. You don't owe us your son." Bass picked up the warrant. His hand didn't shake, but those who were there said his eyes looked like they had turned to ash. If it's anyone else, he might run. If he runs, they'll shoot him. If I go, he comes back, alive to face his soul. Bass tracked his son for 2 days. When he found him, there was no shootout. There was only a father and a son in the middle of a sun-drenched field. Benny wept. Bass didn't say a word. He simply held out the cuffs. He walked his son into the jailhouse, turned him over to the turnkey, and then walked home and closed the door. He didn't emerge for 3 days. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state. The federal marshal's jurisdiction changed, and the old guard was being phased out. Bass was 68 years old. Most men of that age were sitting on porches, in rocking chairs. Bass joined the Muskogee Police Department. For 2 years, he walked a beat in the tough part of town. He carried a cane, but he still wore his twin Colts. It was said that during his entire time as a city cop, not a single crime was committed on his beat. Thugs would see the tall, straight-backed old man walking toward them and simply turn and walk the other way in 1910. Bright's disease finally did what no outlaw could do. Brought Bass Reeves to his bed as he lay dying. Legends of the Black Marshal were already spreading across the country. Thousands of people, black, white, and Native American, lined the streets for his funeral. They told stories of the man who had served 3,000 warrants. They told of the man who was the real-life Lone Ranger, the man who rode a silver gray horse and handed out silver coins to those in need. A detail many historians believe was the inspiration for the fictional hero's silver bullets. Bass Reeves died as he lived, with his boots near his bed and his integrity intact. He had bridged the gap from slavery to the height of American law, proving that justice isn't about the color of a man's skin, but the steel in his soul. The aftermath: history tried to forget Bass Reeves for a century, burying his exploits under the stories of Billy the Kid and Wyatt Earp. But the truth is more resilient than fiction. Today, a massive bronze statue of Bass stands in Fort Smith, Arkansas, a permanent reminder of the man who tamed the Wild West with a badge, a Bible, and a pair of .45s